Hello, everyone. Welcome to Sheffield DocFest. Welcome to Abedel Picture House. And welcome to Mark Cousins here. So first of all, a round of applause to thank to Mark for being here.
Thank you.
This is a dream, I must say, for me, because I find this cinema so beautiful and so full of wonderful ghosts. I imagine the people that watched films here and the films that were shown here and the conversations and the children playing around during the film. So for me, it was a dream to do something in this cinema and to have Mark talking about the things that we will talk about. I think this cinema is perfect for your film. And yes, so I wanted to share this because it will transform the conversation, I am sure. And we are going to talk. It's not about the story of looking the film only. It's not about only the story of looking the book. It's not about the whole filmography of Mark. I would like to make this a journey into images and emotions and ideas, and it's quite unprepared on purpose. So we're kind of in a freestyle. We have a list of images that we numbered, and we will haul things on the conversation, and that's how
Sounds
it will
great.
go.
Yeah.
Yeah.
In the kingdom of the shadows.
So I will start just, there's a very beautiful coincidence, and I'm not sure it's a coincidence, but there's a beautiful circle in this festival. The opening film has a wonderful moment with Ray Charles on stage. A very young Ray Charles in 1969 in the Harlem Cultural Festival. The story of looking starts with Ray Charles talking about seeing and not seeing and giving us this line that you will expand across the film about the things he prefers not to see. And then immediately we are with Mark, and Mark is talking about seeing with our eyes closed. And then we jump into something that I think it's a real abyss that I would like to inhabit, which is to stay there, which is a glimpse branded in your memory. This idea that you bring, a glimpse branded in your memory. And so I would like to start by this idea with Mark and one picture with which you start your book, and we can start the conversation, which is this abyssal relation between looking, memory, future, and past. This temporal abyss that when we look at an image, where we look at the world, it's never just the present. It's always it's a circuit between us and the world that is much more than that.
I think so. On the way down here, for example, on the train, I was sitting on the train, and you know when you're on the train, if you're on the normal seats, there's a little gap and you can see a bit of the person in the seat in front of you. Well, I looked through that gap like a little voyeur, and there was an old gentleman, and he had his tabloid newspaper out. He turned immediately to the back, to the racing page, you know, the racing page where they're saying if you're a betting person, you find out what horses were racing. And he had a Kit Kat. He had his glasses, he had a pen, and he was marking out the racing. And it was a beautiful image. I wanted to photograph it, and I didn't. I was trying to think, what's happening in this man's inner eye? Can he picture the horses, the races? Has he seen any of them? Is that how he's choosing what to bet on? And so I could feel that image going into my head, and I thought, I'll remember this for a long time. But as it went in, I realized I was thinking of my granda, who used to do that. So I could already feel my brain, as it were, connecting this image to other images, bonding it, filing it in some way, and that'll come back. And another day, I will be on another train with glimpsing and being nosy again, and that will connect. So those kind of connective, what you very nicely called the circuit, you know, that goes in, stays there, connects to other things, and then comes out in unexpected ways. The great Scottish writer Robert Louis Stevenson had this phrase, 1,000 coloured pictures to the eye. And I think he meant when he said to the eye, I think he meant what was in there already. And all of you, all of us, you, Cintia, and I, will have images that went into your head at some point, and they have fertilized other images. And they've become nutritious to other images, and they've held the hands of other images and said, come with me. Here's people like us are here, i.e. other types of imagery, whether it's shocking or whatever. And the Ray Charles clip that you mentioned at the beginning of our film, he's asked, would he like to see? Of course, he was blind for most of his life. And he said, well, you know, I've seen the moon and the stars, and I've seen my mother. Wow. He didn't want to see too much more. They were in there, those images, doing their work for the rest of their lives. How fascinating. And it's that idea of fertility, almost like a kind of photosynthesis. You know, the images feed each other. And I think that's wonderful.
So maybe we should start with Cleopatra.
Yes.
But before we do, I forgot to say, if you want to ask questions or make comments, you have slido.com and the codes, and I will open the iPad because I need to see it.
And to explain for the audience, it's because we're live streaming as well, and there are people not here who are watching us. Yeah, so hopefully they're lying in bed.
I will see your questions here. Yes. So let's look at Cleopatra.
Image number one. Look at that. It's okay if I stand up and look at her this way, yeah? See, so this image was done this was a sculpture made in about 40 years before BCE, before Christian era. She was still alive when this image was made. Cleopatra was the most powerful woman in the world then, and perhaps therefore one of the most powerful women ever to exist. So this is the closest we have to her likeness. This is 10 years before she died. Originally, they probably would have been precious jewels in these eyes, but the eyes are gone, the jewels are gone, which is fantastic because it raises the question, what went in there? What was in those eyes? I'm looking at your eyes, and the thing about eyes is they're aqueous, vulnerable, reflective, mysterious in some way. But this empty socket invites us to think, what did she see? She saw the birth of her twins. She saw Mark Antony naked. Because she was so famous, when she stood up in a city, the city would line itself up in symmetry and bow down before her. She must have, like any regal person, the whole world must have looked so symmetrical to her and deferential to her. And of course, she killed herself. So what happened? What were the last things she saw? So, I mean, this is, if there's one person you get asked, who do you want at your dinner party? And people choose 6 people. I don't want 6 people. I want Cleopatra.
It's a multitude.
Multitude, yeah.
So we started with Cleopatra, and the reason why we have this board here and why we have papers here is because maybe we can write Cleopatra there, or empty eyes, or something else, because we have an idea. Because we will rebuild the film, basically. The story of looking, the film you will watch this evening, will be redone here. Empty eyes. We will close the circle in the end. And then we go in the film. So we go from Ray Charles to your bed. You're talking about your phone and a precise picture in your phone that you cannot see anymore, but it's there.
Yeah.
It's again a picture that we need to imagine.
Yeah. In Ireland, where I come from, like many societies, when someone dies, we leave the coffin open. We don't hide the body. And when my granny died, she was lying there in all her glory in her coffin, and when nobody was in the room, I snapped a picture of her body. I don't know why, I just did. You're not supposed to do that. And so it was in my phone. She was dead, but she was in my phone. But then, guess what? The phone died. So the dead woman was in the dead phone, and I still have the phone, and I can still look at it and hold it in my hand and think somewhere in there's a picture of my granny. I could probably get it out. I'm sure some tech person, unlike me, could find that image. Do I need to find it? No, because like Ray Charles, I've seen it. And it was a searing image, it was a discrepant image, it was a shocking image. And so it's always there. I could draw it now, probably, you know. But so that's where, you know, technology comes into this question of memory and the circle, the circuit of looking. You know, the technology means it's there somewhere. Should I need to access it?
It's very beautiful. There's a very beautiful expression by this theater director from Italy, Pippo Del Bono. He made a film called Sangue, where he's, in a moment, he's filming his dead mother. And he's filming and mourning, and he asks himself, why am I filming? And he calls it a lucid eye. Lucid eye. Yeah. I need this lucid eye to cope.
Yeah. That's very interesting. Lucid, I think, is a really good word. And there are two, because it's obviously usually about words, lucid, but you can have, lucid means clear and concise. And there are two other words beginning with L, which is ludic, which is a lovely word, you know, which means playful modernism. And I think many of us as filmmakers, as creative people, want to do ludic. You know, we want to speak with a modern voice in cinema, but a playful voice. And I think also lyric is another one that I really like. And I often talk about really films that I love being, documentary films that I love being kind of lyric prose. They are prose, you know, but they've got a lyricism to them. Should I write those 3 words down? I mean, just for a laugh.
Thank you.
That'd be a good name of a band.
Yeah. So, and then after we are in this glimpse branded in your memory, you say, what if I just lay here in this camera obscura, close my eyes, thought about visual culture, the things I've seen, the things I have not seen, right? And I remembered, there was one, when I was looking at that, I remember the moment when, and I'm sure this happened to you at some time, in some moment in your life. I had read a book. It's a very famous book, but I will not say it because it's not about the theory in the book. I read the book, and there was a moment when the author talks about a picture of his mother. His mother had passed away, and he's going through her things. And he talks about a portrait of her when she was 13 in a winter garden. And I read the book, I closed it, and some months later, I gave the book to a friend, and I said, there is a beautiful picture of the author's mother in a winter garden when she was 13. And he opened the book, and he looked for the picture, and the picture was not there. But I had pictured his mother in my head, and I was absolutely certain that this image exists in my mind. And the author says, I will not show her because it's not about her, it's about seeing her seeing this picture.
Yeah, that's about the power of the unseen. As you were talking there, Cintia, I thought of that great documentary by Maximilian Schell called Marlene. It's about Marlene Dietrich, and it was towards the end of her life. She was, of course, a famous movie star from the 30s, etc. And she agreed to be interviewed by Maximilian Schell, and he thought, fantastic, she's finally agreed to give an interview. He shows up with all his cameras and technology, and she says, what's that? And she says, that's the camera. And she said, no pictures. What do? You cannot film the person you're making a documentary about. So he did an audio interview, just sound only, and then brilliantly recreated her apartment in a studio in Paris, I think, and then had his cameras slowly tracking through the apartment. So we see her apartment, we see her world, we see the chairs, we see the beds, we see everything apart from Marlene herself. And of course, the tracking becomes like a ghost, like a phantom. It's like she's drifting through her own apartment. And so the power of the unseen in this book, in his film, and of course, Werner Herzog talks regularly about do not show the thing. It's too beautiful. Don't show it. And, you know, Werner Herzog's very interested in that idea of the numinous, the ineffable, all that stuff. So all of that comes into play when we talk about the unseen, I think. And it's tempting as a filmmaker, often, I'm sure many of you know, if you've got the money shot, the key shot, the brilliant shot in your film, sometimes you have to cut it out. It's very painful, but it really works when you do.
There is a beautiful moment when you talk about Ingrid Bergman
yes.
in your book and in your film.
Yeah. I mean, there's you know, Ingrid Bergman, of course, was in cinema for many years, and she worked in the Hollywood system. She worked in the Italian neo-realist system. She worked with Ingmar Bergman. And I found when I was writing the book 2 images from her which were compositionally identical. One was from Casablanca, and one was from Ingmar Bergman film. And I found that if you put the 2 of them together, 30-something years apart, you've got old Ingrid looking at young Ingrid. Young Ingrid hadn't had children. The war was still going, so the young Ingrid didn't know if the Nazis would be defeated. A whole series of momentous personal and private events happened between the 2 pictures, and the older lady looking back knew, had the confidence, had the knowledge that many things would be okay in the life of Ingrid. And putting 2 images like that together, an older person looking at their younger self, is fantastic. And now that I turned 56 this year, yeah. And so I am now getting to an age where I can look back at younger self and start to understand the younger self.
And we look at you and we do not see your younger self, but it's there. We walk with our ghosts of our past selves.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's what cinema is also, right?
Cinema, I mean, it's
the connection between 2 images.
It's a message in a bottle. You know, whatever is filmed today, and I film every day, whatever is filmed today will be digitally sealed in some way, and like a message in a bottle. And in 50 years' time, you take the lid off the bottle and the message is still there. Obviously, it dates in some ways because digital formats dated, but there's something about the moment, like Greta Garbo is still alive on the big screen. And imagine how many times this cinema was built in 1920. So how many times did Garbo appear on this screen? And of course, the crucial thing about a big screen was that it was massive. If Garbo blinked, the blink would be almost a meter in close-up. I mean, that sense of scale, of magnification was remarkable, and that's why people came to these kingdoms of the shadows to see that, I think.
I think we need to write ghosts or something like that. Thank you. There is another rhyme in this festival that is also curious. There is one film that we showed that is very different from your, well, it does have connections, but it's very different from your work. Theo Anthony's All Light Everywhere. The film starts with the optic nerve. And it starts talking about the optic nerve as the place of blindness. Nothing appears in the optic nerve. It's the space between the subject and the world where images will be formed, and it's the connection with the brain where subjectivity will appear, but it's empty in itself.
Because the brain is blind. The brain never sees light.
And so, and then you talk about Cézanne's idea, the optical experience that develops in us. That is an old Cézanne's idea. He was old, which is very important.
Should we put him up, number 12?
Yeah.
The image number 12, Paul Cézanne. Yeah, I mean, and that idea that Paul Cézanne was a great looker. Obviously, he looked at Mont Saint-Victoire and he looked at his canvas and he thought to himself, neither of these should dominate, neither the hill nor the paint. But if I can give them the same weight on the canvas, you know. But that sense that he wrote in a letter, the optical experience is developing in him, and this was at the end of his life, so it was still developing. The picture was still developing. You know, that was fantastic. You know, that shows that there's an aspect of looking which is forever young, or we never get there. We are a constant apprentice in looking, always learning to look. And I thought that was fantastic. And I certainly feel it for me. I'm always learning to look, but somebody like him, he was brilliant at it and he never got there.
Yes, he was. He had this idea of the truth, to give the truth in painting. And the truth was nothing about telling facts. It was about expressing something much deeper. The truth of the mountain. He painted the mountain of Saint-Victoire for numerous times, and it was always about...
Yeah, and look at the way he painted his wife, Madame Cézanne. You know, she's often tilted at an angle, and there are paintings where you can see that the curtain fabric in the room is as important in the image as Madame Cézanne, his beloved wife, you know. And often, interestingly, her eye sockets are empty, like Cleopatra's eye sockets were empty, you know. And so he definitely wasn't, you know, he wasn't looking at it trying to do a psychological portrait. The truth that you're talking about is a canvas, surface truth that responds to the world, but also tries to respond to the canvas. And that combination, one of my favorite writers is Gertrude Stein, and she said this brilliant thing. Well, she said so many brilliant things, but she said this thing that I think I mentioned at dinner the other night, Cintia. She said this thing that imagination is observation plus construction. So what she's saying is the final artwork is a product of looking out into the poetic world, the messy, anarchic, extravagant, boring poetic world, and then structuring those observations. And that's exactly what Paul Cézanne did.
So let's look at another eye, which is your eye cut.
Okay.
And
number 5.
Yeah, number 5.
Brace yourself. That's my eye.
We were talking about the optical nerve.
Yes.
We were talking about the optical.
Yes.
Experience.
Yes. And a few years ago, this eye suddenly developed a pretty serious cataract, and I went to have a look at it, and they said, "Oh, that's pretty bad." So this is the moment when the surgeon, is anybody cringing or hiding or a little bit? I'm sure. I know there are people who hate looking at things like this. This is the moment the scalpel's going in the bottom of the eye there, and see that sort of grey shape in the very center. That's my damaged lens, and they use ultrasound, I think, to destroy the lens, and then they suck it out, and then I put a bit of plastic in, and the bit of plastic is currently in there, and it took 21 minutes, and it transformed me. I think many of us are interested in transformation, in something, and becoming new, and I thought, part of me in some way thought, oh no, my eyes are going, this is the slippery slope, what will go next? Will it be the knees or the hips, you know? And to have this new bit of plastic, which made me able to see better than I had in forever in that eye, felt like a bit of like a mini little rebirth for me. I felt like I was 5 years old again.
From your eye,
Yeah,
I would like to go to image number 6, which is the man on the roof.
Oh, yes.
We're doing editing now. I'm re-editing your film.
This is the view outside my flat in Edinburgh where I live, and I got up and I looked out and I saw that guy. And my first thought was, oh, he looks as if he's going to jump. But you could tell by the body language. I got my camera out, of course. As a filmmaker, get your camera out. And long lens on and frame it up. And I could see that his body language was quite relaxed. And he stood there, I think, for 10, 15 minutes. He would have a cigarette. He would spit a bit, look around him. And this is an image which will stay with me. It's another one of those indelible images. Just because it's so striking. I'd lived there for 20 years or more at that point, more and more, and I had not seen somebody stand up there before. And then, of course, I thought, how is he seeing the world? What is it from his point of view? One of the people that I admire very much in history is Copernicus, and that is what Copernicus asked. He said, what if we are not the center of the world? And when you look at somebody like that, or when I see the little old man on the train with his newspaper out marking the thing, you ask yourself, what if I was her or him? What would it look like? And so I asked myself, what would it look like for him, etc. And it really stayed with me. And this image, as you know, occurs several times in the film.
Yes, and it's striking because we can imagine what he's seeing, but we can also imagine what one sees in different contexts, what this image may mean to different people with different histories and backgrounds.
Sure.
So for me, he's waiting for his crowds to do some revolution.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
he's hiding and trying to change something. Or he's just a romantic and he's thinking about life. And that's your project.
Yeah.
And
what's good is it's you talked about the lucid image. We've got some of this. I think this is a lucid image. And I think it is a lyric image as well. And it's unreadable. We can't get there. And you could say this is the limit of imagery. I mean, if you're writing a novel, you could say the young man stood on the roof and he looked at the morning light and the city doth like a garland wear the beauty of the evening or whatever. You know, you could easily write what he's thinking. The image can't write what he's thinking. The image can do something else. You know, kind of bind us in some way, you know that thing, you can't take your eyes off an image, and that was the case here.
So we go to your project.
Yes.
Because your project did not start with your cataracts.
No, it didn't. No, the idea was to make an adaptation of the book, and with my producers Adam and Mary, who are here in the front row. And the initial idea was to try and turn the book into 3 2-hour films, quite a detailed, comprehensive history of looking in science and technology and sport and, in sexuality and geography, etc. But we couldn't get any funding for that, to be honest. So then the next idea was to turn it into a sort of day in the life of looking, and that's when I produced this bit of paper. I might need your help. Can you just hold the end of that, please? And so I always like to scribble on bits of paper and turn the film into something very visible. So we came here to Sheffield DocFest and had this bit of paper, and if you stretch it out, and so we showed the funders, here's the film, here's the running order, and at the beginning it says dawn up there at your end, and somewhere in the middle it says morning, and then landscape, bodies, noon, cities, power, night, etc. So I thought, okay, that's an idea. There's a sort of day in the life of looking. But then I got my cataract diagnosis, and we realized that it would be very interesting to see that process of me getting my eye cut, and it would be sort of a good metaphor and something visual, so we filmed that. And even then, even at that point, the film wasn't quite working. It was still mostly a voiceover. And this was before COVID, then I decided, what if I sort of just film myself talking in bed? So this was a kind of creative idea, not a COVID idea. Sort of lie in a room and imagine looking. And so that's when the sort of final form of the film came.
And I would like now to, because I love the film and I love the moment how you talk about it, but for me, it is an eye also, the Satyajit Ray. Image number 4.
So many of you will know the films of Satyajit Ray, the great Indian filmmaker. That's slightly stretched. It shouldn't be like that. So this is his film Jalsanagar, the music room, and it's about an old gentleman in a dark room, and I was in a dark room, and so I started, and it's in the book, this sequence as well. But Satyajit Ray said that he was very interested in the microcosm, to see the world in a drop of water, reflected in a dewdrop or something. And in this particular film, it's about an old gentleman, a Brahmin, rather posh, who's been listening to music in his room for many decades. And here he's getting, it's it's late in his life and the world around him's changing, democracy's coming, etc. And he's sitting looking at his whiskey glass, and in it he sees the reflection of his chandelier. And this image is about the smallness of his life, what it's reduced to, a kind of dewdrop, but the grandeur as well. Look at the posh chandelier, you know. So Satyajit Ray, I think, was really great at capturing the kind of world shift in a moment.
It's also quite hypnotic. It refers a lot to the idea of hypnosis, the cinema, how hypnotic is, and the idea of the eye. You actually have the multiple eyes of Mabuse also in the book. How the eye in the cinema becomes something else, becomes the projector, becomes the monster, and becomes the hypnotic being.
Yeah, loads of filmmakers like filming eyes. There are quite a few horror movies about eyes. The eyes of Laura Mars, for example, there are lots of them. And you know, famously in Soviet times onwards, lots of filmmakers have used eyes. And it is strange seeing such a small thing on such a big screen, the eye, and yeah, hypnotism, and then loads of ideas about the evil eye comes up in many cultures, etc. So the eye comes to symbolize a lot of things. The inner eye, the threatening eye, the dangerous eye, the vulnerable eye. It is so, we feel our eyes are very vulnerable. So there's kind of a chain of associations with eyes that filmmakers have loved to use.
There is also the question of scale here. So this idea of microcosms and this idea of something very small that kind of condenses a wider scale. And then I would like to make a big jump.
Yes.
To image number 2.
Oh yes.
Because it's also about scale.
Yeah.
And
very famous image, one of the great images of the 20th century, I think. So we're in 1970 here in the Warsaw Ghetto. And this is Chancellor Willy Brandt, who visited the ghetto in order to attempt, on behalf of the nation of Germany, to apologize to the Jews for the attempted genocide of the Jewish race. And so he arrived there. He didn't expect to kneel, but he said, he wrote in his memoir, he fell to his knees because he thought, what can I say? What I can say is something visual, fall to your knees. And he did. And look at all the cameras, and every eye in this picture is looking at him. And his head, you know, if you were composing this image as a painter, you couldn't put the head in a better place, the dark background of the clothes or something, and the eye line looking slightly down. And this act of mea culpa, of the attempt to apologize for the apologizable, a crime so awful that nothing will do, but this was an attempt. And I think a profound attempt, you know, and of course this image went around the world, and the Polish ambassador to Germany said at that moment in this image, not a word but an image, the relationships between the diplomatic relationship between Poland and Germany improved. So this is the power of an image, and obviously power isn't necessarily good. Powerful images can do terrible harm, but this image did a lot of good, I think.
What is the part of the book where the image comes? I noted it.
I've got a section on war.
Exactly.
And I think it comes in there.
Yeah, it does.
And of course, war, you know, when you ask how has war been visualized, you know, in cinema and photography and painting, etc., there's a lot to say of that. But I think this is really one of the most interesting images about that.
Yes.
And look at his body language. Look how straight his body is. You know, look at the way his feet are, you know, tucked under his coat. I'm sorry, I should know the name of the photographer, and it's terrible not, but I've forgotten. Does anybody know the name of the photographer here? No, I've forgotten. And there were loads of photographs, as you can see. Each one of those photographers there used an image, but this is the one, I think.
Because many times seeing is also about, and that is why I was talking about scale, seeing and understanding is also about reducing a little bit. It's also about focusing on something, because sometimes the scale of things is so enormous that we cannot make any measure of it. And so the fact that this man kneels and
Yeah, because this isn't a man kneeling, this is Germany kneeling, and so he has a metonym, you know, he's one thing standing for a huge thing, and that's the reducing of the scale that you're talking about, you know. And if we can do that, because the world is overwhelming and geopolitics is overwhelmingly complex, and I'm sure I certainly feel like in a meteor storm of imagery, you know, so the one that can refine is, and also too, the one that can make us see anew. You know, by this stage in 1970, so much had been said about the aftermath of World War II and the atrocities, but this made us see something new. And there's a word that's used in Russia, it might be a time to write another word on the board. It's the word ostranani, and what it means is sort of like trying to make something new, defamiliarize it. And this is what we as filmmakers are trying to do all the time. It's like we all have cataracts and we're all seeing fuzzy in a fuzzy way or a conventional way or a bored way. And we need to, as filmmakers, show things anew, like remove the cataract or use this idea of ostranani. I might spell it wrongly.
Ostranenia.
Yeah, and it's like duende, you know, the duende, where, you know, that idea of, you know, trying to get back to to be overwhelmed. We should be overwhelmed by what the apology that Germany had to make. And how do you remind people of that? And it's through ostranani. And shall I write duende? It's really, those two things, you know, obviously it was Federico García Lorca who talked a lot about, is that the right spelling of that? Probably not. But these two words really go well together. How do I see anew so I am properly overwhelmed by the extraordinary fact of life, the atrocity of life, and the rapture, you know, of life? Not in the religious sense of it.
Is that one of the things that motivate you to make your films and your books about visual culture and film culture, to help, or to, not to help, but maybe to suggest and to provoke the capacity that we have to see new, to see anew?
Yes, and it's for myself, not, you know, if other people get it as well, that's great, but it's for myself. The danger, I think it's easy to underestimate or under-imagine your life, the problems, the luxuries, the privileges. It's hard, it's very easy to under-imagine and half get it. And if filmmakers are doing their job really well, if image makers are doing their job really well, then they help us fully imagine rather than half imagine things. And like the people who, I can't remember the name of the architects who did this building, but they are trying to do that as well. They're trying to help us imagine at sometimes a rather fake world of Hollywood, a utopia, but they're in that business of trying to get us there to a bigger place, and I would say in some ways a fake place in terms of a lot of the Hollywood cinema, but nonetheless, that's what they're trying to do. They're saying, come with me, you know, open your eyes a bit wider.
Opening imaginations.
Yeah, certainly. You know, and we all have imaginations, and as we know, Pablo Picasso said, all children are artists, and most children's drawings are better than most adult drawings, I think, you know, and so we unlearn, I think, as we grow up and we become adult, and we have so many challenges and relationships and stresses and disappointments and hurts and bruises that there's a real feeling that we might close down a bit. It's easier to get through life if you're a bit closed down, you know, and defended. And it's scary not to be defended, you know, but I think that certainly filmmakers, they just have to be undefended, and like a child is in some way.
That just reminded me of the place of Citizen Kane in your film.
Yes. Yeah, you always get a bit of Citizen Kane into your work, yeah. Well, in the film we use that famous story about glimpsing a young woman on a boat, and you see one glimpse and you remember it for the rest of your life. It's Ray Charles, I've seen my children, I've seen my mother, I've seen the moons, and no, I haven't seen my children, I've seen my mother, I've seen the moons and the child, me glimpsing my granny. These glimpses, these indelible moments, these are the, the stepping stones of our, what Cézanne calls our optical development. Yeah, so that Citizen Kane was for me.
There was about this idea of imagination and pollinizing each other's imaginations. I always, there is one story from my childhood that I will share because I find it really funny. And I think it was the first time I understood visual culture. I was like 6. And my father had these macho friends. He's typical Portuguese macho, really loved to, drag girls and talk about how he was great on that. And one day he was explaining how he could become, unforgettable for a woman. And so he explained.
I think that's up to her to say rather than him.
He said, you know how you do it? You meet the woman, in a casual manner, you say, well, my favorite color is yellow. And then you go on. And then 2 days later, you meet the woman again and you give her a yellow rose. Every time she sees yellow, she will think of you. And for me, of course, this is stupid. But for me, I was a child. And listening to this, and listening to the mysterious grasp that this man had of what could be visual culture was really interesting. And I think that from then on, it was about complexifying this. What happens to me, to my relation with the world, when two images come together? Because film is very much about that. And I think Citizen Kane, for example, is a film that speaks about this capacity that images have of connecting to each other and triggering a mysterious history behind them, right?
And isn't that story's, he's so keen to impose himself. That's not somebody who's listening or curious or wanting to know. He's wanting to impose the yellowness on things. He'll never learn very much, that guy.
Of course, but which also speaks to the way visual culture can be something opening or something closing, and something
absolutely.
That imposes and a game of manipulation.
Mm-hmm.
And so that is also why I was asking you about your work, because the way we learn how to look at art will define the way we can think about the world. And so if it's open or closing, if it's expansive or... And so projects about film, projects about images, are projects that are deeply, deeply dangerous in the best sense of the word.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it makes me think of image number 11. Could we put that one up of the Mexican image? Would you see this if you haven't seen it before? It's beautiful. Look at that. This is Mexico 900 years in the Christian era. And this is a man with his child, with the little girl on his back. And I've never seen this image before. And probably we've all done this, although nowadays it's more likely that you carry your child on the front than on the back, isn't it? But imagine putting the camera where that child is, and it's looking right up, and it'll see maybe, the back of her dad's head, and then up to the sky. And I just think, as a filmmaker, we can learn from that shot, because it must be very emotional, and it's very intense and jogging up and down. But I'm sure there's a smile. Is there a smile? If we turn upside down?
Yes.
Oh yeah, she's smiling upside down as well. And I just love that image. I think it's about the joy of looking. She looks slightly like a frog in some ways. I think it's so beautiful.
And maybe we can go to the Henry Moore sculpture.
Yes. I love this. The reason I love this is it's basically Darth Vader, isn't it? It's Darth Vader's helmet. And for me, I don't know anything about Henry Moore's intention here, but what we can certainly see is a inner entity surrounded by a skull-like outer entity. And what that inner structure is, you know, you could call it consciousness, you could call it the thought process, you could just call it the brain surrounded by something. And I think it's one thing protecting another thing. It's a bit like the previous image, a sense of care or protection, but it does remind me of Darth Vader as well, you know, the sort of scary thing. So I think there's something...
The most vulnerable character.
Yeah, I know. And I think there's something definitely Freudian or certainly about the unconscious here, I think. And I think there are two little eye holes up at the top. And of course, this was done in 1939, which is long before Star Wars.
When did you first see Star Wars? Do you remember?
When it came out, yeah. Because I saw, so I would have been 11 or 12.
In the cinema?
In cinema in Dublin, I saw it with my brother, and it was the first. One of the things was that the sound technology had changed at that point. So as well as looking new, it sounded different. You really could hear the starships going over your head, and it felt as if they were coming from the back into the front. You know, overwhelming. I remember when we came out of the cinema, we ran. My brother and I ran down O'Connell Street and Princess Street in Dublin. We didn't know where we were going. We just had to run. We had been injected by imaginative rocket fuel.
And so you watched the first Star Wars of the series in that time?
Yes.
And after that you watched the others?
Every single moment.
And now?
Yeah, if anything comes out. I mean, I love very, very mainstream cinema and very, very, very experimental cinema and everything in between. So as soon as the cinemas opened, the first film I went to see was Godzilla versus Kong. Two monsters, you know, which was a lot of fun. The only thing the filmmakers forgot to tell us was why Godzilla was fighting Kong. At least I missed it. If they did tell us, they were just beating the crap out of each other for no apparent reason, but still it was a lot of fun.
Sorry, let me just look at... Okay, we're good. So let's move on your film, or what I picked up from your film, because I don't want to... This is not a Q&A about your film. This is some sort of appropriation of your film. And you already talked a little bit about that, but I would like to talk a bit more about... You talked about point of view.
Yeah.
I would like it to twist that into something else, and talk about the filmmaker's body and the place of the filmmaker. There's a moment in your film where you say, when a bird sees this, which I will not say what, it's a beautiful image, they see what. And I thought, I was thinking when I was looking at that, I was thinking about this idea that we all, everyone, curves the universe around us, right? And we organize the images around us, and there are images that are closer to us. Probably for me, the image of a red carnation is closer than the image of Daisy.
Yeah. Because
you,
of the revolution in Portugal. Yeah.
For you, probably there's there's another flower that is closer to you than. So we carve the world around us, and we organize the images around us according to our stories and our memories, and the fading images and the branded images in our minds. But I would like to go to image 7.
Yeah.
And talk about that's when you are filming.
Yeah. Again, that's stretched. So.
That's stretched, yes.
Yeah, I think a few of them are stretched, but it's okay. So this is in Kurdistan. When I started filmmaking, you know, it was all very, you know, it was all guys doing everything, you know, so there was, I didn't get to handle the camera myself as a director, you know, there's somebody who did that for me. But as the equipment miniaturized, I started shooting myself, and this is the first time I was my own cinematographer. And I noticed when I looked through the eyepiece, this curvature that you describe sort of happens, the world disappears. When I looked at the rushes on this film, I noticed most of them were about 2 minutes or 90 seconds. Each shot was 2 minutes or 90 seconds, and I thought, I wonder why that is. And I realized I hold my breath when I'm shooting, when I press record. And that's how long I can hold my breath for. You know, so you mentioned about the role that your body plays in it. Absolutely. You can feel it. You can feel your heart beating when you're shooting, and everything else I can see nothing. I'm closing my left eye there, the eye that got the cataract. The only thing you can see is this frame, and this frame becomes a temporary world, and you become hyper alert. You become adrenalized to that world, what you're seeing in that frame, and unexpected things happen. And nowadays, I typically shoot a shot for like 10 minutes, because it's so cheap to do that nowadays. And the longer you run, that temporary rectangular world becomes absolutely hypnotic. A car drives past and then is out of shot. You notice the car, and then you notice the silence after the car. And that silence is exciting, and you think, okay, I'm about to cut. And then a woman pushes her pram through, and you become really interested in her, like the guy doing his newspaper or something, you know. So there's something about the framing and the shooting which makes you hyper alert to what's happening. And I absolutely love it, and I do it every day. And, you know, sports people talk about the zone. They're in the zone. That's the zone for me.
And it completely transforms the idea of truth, isn't it? There's a truth that it's inherent to the act of filmmaking that is not about the outside truth or just the inner truth. It's something in between that's...
Yeah, I mean, it's a tricky word, that word truth, isn't it? You know,
I know,
because I don't use it very often, you know, because there's so many problems and risks with it, and whose truth and what
the reason why I'm bringing it is because we are in a documentary film festival, and many times people need to think this is true.
Yeah.
And I wonder, I think that one of our roles as filmmakers, programmers, people who work with films, is to complexify that idea of truth and to offer different iterations of what could be truth, like Cézanne did.
Yeah, yeah.
You know? And that is why I'm asking you, because it's not about the truth of what you are filming or the truth inside you, it's something else. Maybe it's not truth, maybe it's something more concrete than truth.
Yeah, I think that for me, the most important truth as a filmmaker is between me and the audience. I cannot lie to you. If I lie to these people here, then I've broken some kind of Hippocratic oath. I have to tell the truth to them. If I fake something, a shot, that's fine. As long as I tell the audience that I've faked it, that's the solecism. That's the deal breaker, doing that if you don't fess up to what you've done, you know. So I think that's where I'd absolutely happily use the word truth completely. In other ways, you know, filmmaking is an imaginative act, and it's a shaping act, and it's go back to what Gertrude Stein says, observation plus structure. So that, you know, so the truth isn't so useful. The truth isn't so useful quite in that moment, but it's very useful in this moment.
Maybe we can go from the Iraq to the unseen again.
Oh yes,
to Voltage.
Dorothea, one of my favorite painters coming up. Yeah, number 3. Dorothea Tanning, the great, very long-living surrealist painter. I just love this picture. You know, even for me, it's about the way it moves your eye. Where does your eye land? At the top of her hair? If so, you follow it round, and then you come to this gate-like figure in her breast. And then what does your eye do? It goes maybe round her arm, and then up to her shoulder, and then you catch the scarf, and suddenly you're up there, and you're down there. And she's taken us on a vortex, like round and round her own body. But then look what she's got. She's got a corkscrew that she might have used to open a bottle of vino, but her eyes are on the corkscrew. And you all know her name. You know her name, don't you? Do you want me to write it down? So I think she's one of the greats, but I think she's also riffing on Christian imagery, you know, the way that St. Cecilia was painted in Christian iconography was she was carrying her eyes on a plate. And so I think Dorothea Tanning, who knew her art well, is doing that. But and there's a void where her head should be. And then what's that sea? Is she floating in a sea? And here's like a shelf that she's leaning on. I'm not saying what this painting's about, because I don't know, but I can say what it does to my eye. In fact, there's another one here. Would it be useful, Cintia, to go to number 10?
Yes.
Yes. Emily Wilding Davidson image again, that's stretched. This is a very famous image, as you know. The great suffragette, the great activist for women's rights, and she had been multiply imprisoned at this point. She was 40 here, and she was trying to pin a protest banner or badge on the horse of the king. So I can tell you what my eye does. The first thing I see is that horse, and it's spread out like that. And my eye goes down here to this rider here. And then so you start up and then go down to bottom right. And then my eye comes over to her here. And that's Emily Wilding Davidson herself. And it kind of lands there, so there's a bit of a swirl the way in the previous one. But look at her arm's up, her head's up, her knee is up. She doesn't die for another 4 days, but this is an up image. Everything about her is up, as if there's a kind of last gasp. It could be just, this is a frame enlargement from a film, so it could be just that moment, but certainly there's something poignant there. You could take that bit of her body and make a painting of it itself, because it's got an abstract quality. Obviously, it's deeply moving. She had a pretty terrible life, and these are the last days of her life. And of course, then this image became very important in the process of women's liberation, etc. But just as an image in itself, it's also striking and haunting.
The relation between stillness and movement is very interesting in your films. And in this film in particular is quite striking.
I think in real life, I'm a very mobile person. You can see I don't even sit still. I'm always moving around. So when I started making films, I found that often I didn't move the camera at all. And more recently I have been, but for years I didn't move the camera. And I think that very fast, quite hyper people, I don't need a thriller, for example, because life feels like a thriller because my heart's often beating quite fast. So I'm looking at something to slow my heartbeat, you know, between I'm wanting to move from sensation to contemplation. And that means that certainly a lot of my early films were very still. There's a bit more movement now, but still I enjoy the stillness of the image, because that means if the frame isn't moving, then you become more alert to movement within the frame. And I love that.
Which you are fascinated for, because that's
Yes.
what I meant.
Yes.
The relation
Yes.
between stillness
Yeah.
and movement
Yeah.
is...
I love Sergei Eisenstein, the great brilliant filmmaker. He's there in my arm, and he studied theatre before he became a filmmaker, engineering theatre. And he said he would sit in the audience in Moscow and on the sidelines here and watch the audiences, all their eyes move to the same bit of the stage. And he said that directing is moving the audience's eye in cinema. So just the way as I was talking there about this kind of triangular structure where our eye might move, I tried to do that a little bit in my films, move the audience's eye around the screen with me, but he did it brilliantly.
There's a very beautiful, if you can call it, film by Michael Snow. I cannot remember the title, but it's a photograph.
And then it goes slowly in. Wavelength? No, not that one?
No. It's just one still.
Yeah.
It's not a film, actually.
All right, okay.
It's one photograph of a shelf, and it's a tape. And his voice is taking your eyes.
I know that one, yeah.
And it's really beautiful.
I think if you trust people, I think as filmmakers we're saying, look, give me 90 minutes of your time and I promise I'll do something interesting with it. It's a bit like saying, let me take you by the hand and gently show you something. That can go wrong if the person taking you is boring or whatever, but that moving the audience's eye around the frame is basically the job, I think. And so I've been saying for years, I bore myself silly, saying that I don't think cinema is necessarily a medium of story, for example. You know, it's a medium, it's more close to magic and myth and visual encounter.
There's a very direct line between actually hypnotism and cinema.
Absolutely.
The old traditions of animal magnetism, it's what
Absolutely.
they called it before.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Alfred Hitchcock was a hypnotist, and when you think of in a film like The Birds, which you all have seen, you know, some of the most famous moments, usually there would be loads of music and intensity, and Hitchcock drops the soundtrack out entirely, and there's complete silence, and we are holding our breath. We don't want to disturb that silence. There's a sequence where Jessica Tandy goes down a corridor and discovers a man whose eyes are pecked out. And the silence hypnotizes. And Hitchcock and many other filmmakers really got that. I think Kira Muratova, who's one of my favorite filmmakers, I think she really got that as well. And Kinyo Tanaka, who was the great Japanese director, she really got that as well. We don't have images there. I've got stuff in my arms.
I don't know. Oh, I don't know if we still have time or not. I thought I was controlling, but actually I'm not. Wait, let me check. Yeah, well, we are almost in the end.
Okay.
But talking about hypnotizing,
yeah.
I want to go to image 8.
Okay.
Again, you with your fragile eye.
So this is a frame grab from the film that's on tonight, and this is the moment where after I had the eye operation, you know, when you get these cataract eye operations, you've got a plastic thing in your eye for a couple of days, and I couldn't wait to take it off. My eye was sore, and it felt burning. It felt like there was acid in it, and finally I peeled this plastic thing off, and this is me sitting in bed and just looking around with the new eye, and I start to cry. And I started to cry because, I don't say this in the film, but I'll say it now. I started to cry because I thought, wow, I can see clearly again. My eyesight has come back. Hallelujah. I was terrified that I wouldn't see properly. And then I cried more because I realized that was not true. When I actually looked around, everything looked really fuzzy. And I thought, oh no, the operation hasn't worked. So it went, within this moment, I went from whoa to oh, like that. And both were, you know, happy tears, sad tears sort of thing. And I think that's definitely, I remember so clearly that moment. Yeah, I held my hand out and I thought, oh God, it doesn't look any better than it did before.
Have you ever cried filming?
Oh yes, lots. Yeah, for all sorts of things. I filmed in refugee camps and cried there. I made a film about neo-Nazism and Holocaust denial, and was taken to Auschwitz-Birkenau by a great survivor of the camp who was in Canada Commando, and she's called Kitty Hart Moxon, and she told us what happened, and you know, many times, you know. And I think you can't. You know, it's going back to what we're talking about, being defended and under-imagining things. You know, you have to be super alert and exposed, and what all the emotional implications of that.
And this is a tricky question. Maybe you don't want to answer it. But if you could choose the last image of your filmography, would you choose it? Or you prefer not to choose?
Oh, you mean
to know that this will be the last image of our filmography?
You know, it'd be better at choosing like the first image, because the last doesn't make sense to me. You know, I feel as if I've got a new eye and I'm making more films than ever, so I'm just starting. So the last feels a lifetime away from here in the future.
You give it away to destiny.
Yeah.
To whatever happens.
Absolutely.
So I will close this talk with my comment, Terry, on an image that I brought to, that is a comment on Mark's book and Mark's film, which I felt was closing the cycle, which is image number 13. And I hope it has good quality, because I am not great with, yes.
Yeah, that's visible.
Which is the last image of a filmmaker's filmography. And it's the filmmaker's eye. And the filmmaker is João César Monteiro. He made, the first image of his filmography is a window and a poet by the window. And the last image is his eye looking at the spectator. And in between, he made many films. I'm not going to talk about the films. The reason why I brought this image is because he did not know this would be the last image of his filmography. But the truth is that when I saw the film and when I saw this eye that starts with movement and then stays still, and in stillness stays for like 5 minutes looking at us, I was thinking about how striking it is to do this movement of looking at your spectator, looking at your audience, and offering your eye as a closing curtain to your film, and in this case to your work.
Because what it says is, look how vulnerable I am, because that's it'd be really easy to damage that. So it's generous, and offering is a really nice word.
And it's a little bit some sort of bringing death to the common space, to everyday space.
And the very last image that Alfred Hitchcock ever shot was a blink of an eye. He didn't know it would be his last image, but it was.
Thank you very much. And I hope you will stay for the Q&A after the film, Mark's film, because then we will talk about the film more. And I hope you will bring your questions there. Thank you. Thank you, Mark.